between incumbent Republican Congressman David Valadao and Democrat TJ Cox. Politico lists the race as leans Republican.
Now, from your local election headquarters, a 21st Congressional District debate between incumbent Republican David Valadao and challenger Democrat TJ Cox. Live with moderators Jim Scott, 17 News, and Evan Onstadt, KC24 News. Your local election headquarters, 21st Congressional District debate starts now.
It's a choice for Valley voters at a time of great division.
Congressman David Valadao has served in Congress since 2013 under Democratic and Republican administrations. He's a conservative from Hanford, a dairy farmer by trade. His opponent, Democrat TJ Cox, is an engineer and community developer who lives in Fresno.
Democrats have a 17-point voter registration advantage in the 21st District, which voted for Hillary Clinton in 2016. Yet Valadao, a Republican, has never seriously been threatened on Election Day. Will this year be different?
With issues like immigration and health care unresolved and control of Congress up in the air, this is a race being watched here and around the country. And good evening to you, and thanks for being with us here tonight. I am Jim Scott with 17 News in Bakersfield.
And I'm Evan Onstadt with KC24 up in Fresno. Want to say a special welcome to all of our viewers here from the 21st Congressional District.
Now let's just take a look briefly at the 21st Congressional District. It takes up a good chunk of the Central Valley. It covers parts of Fresno, Kern, Kings, and Tulare counties. Cities within the district include Coalinga, Delano, Hanford, parts of Bakersfield, all the way down to Arvin and Lamont.
A reminder, we are streaming this debate live on both of our station websites, kget.com and yourcentralvalley.com. We're also up live on our station Facebook pages. Looking forward to reading those comments. And there is a discussion brewing on Twitter right now. Use the hashtag ValadaoCoxDebate. And stay with us online, because after this, we will have the show after the show, a live discussion with political analysts both in Fresno and in Bakersfield with their thoughts on how tonight's debate played out.
We're just all over it, aren't we?
We're trying to be.
All right. Now, the candidates have been apprised of the ground rules for tonight's debate. We're going to start with opening statements, and by a flip of the coin, TJ Cox is elected to go last. Same order will apply to closing statements. So, Mr. Valadao, opening statement, please, 90 seconds, sir.
Well, thank you. I want to thank both of you for hosting this event. Obviously, KC24 and KGT, both great stations, do a great job in the Central Valley. My name is David Valadao. I represent the 21st Congressional District. I've lived here my entire life, born and raised in the Central Valley, Hanford specifically. My kid still goes to the same high school that I went to. I know all the people in the district. I love sitting around, doing my teletown halls and signing all the letters, leaving my office and seeing all the different names of people I've known since I was a little kid. I know the issues well, personally experienced a lot of the different struggles that agriculture goes through, water issues, immigration issues, healthcare issues. My family struggles with the exact same issues. And so it's important for me as a friend, as a neighbor, and as a person that's lived here my entire life to really go back to Washington and fight for the constituents of the 21st Congressional District. And I look forward to this debate here today and having a conversation with the two of you and with the viewers at home.
Mr. Cox, 90 seconds.
Thank you, Jim, Evan, for hosting us tonight, and thank you for everyone for viewing in. My name is TJ Cox. I'm a native Californian and the son of immigrants. My dad came from China, my mom from the Philippines. And like many of us throughout the Central Valley, they both became very proud, naturalized U.S. citizens. I'm an engineer, a family man with 4 kids, and also a small businessman. My wife, Kathy, is a pediatric intensive care physician who has the privilege of taking care of our children and our families throughout the Central Valley. About a decade ago, I founded a company that has a simple mission: to make a positive difference in the lives of Central Valley communities. And we've done just that. Over the last 6 years, we've created over 1,500 well-paying jobs. We've brought healthcare access to 25,000 residents of the 21st Congressional District. We have funded innovative job training and educational facilities. I work in the neighborhoods where the banks and Wall Street just won't go. And through my work, I know one thing. We all know one thing: that we don't get our fair share of investment here in the Valley. Our tax dollars go to Washington and they don't come home. I've been working in the Central Valley to make a positive difference. And that's something I know I can continue to do as your next congressman.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. Lots of ground to cover tonight. We want to start out with a couple of questions about water. President Trump in Arizona last week signed a memorandum setting expedited timelines for reviewing environmental impacts from dams and canal projects that pump water to Central and Southern California farms and communities, and to streamline those reviews. What legislative or regulatory weight does that memorandum carry, if any? Or was it more election year window dressing meant to help GOP congressmen in California who are in tight races? Congressman Valadao, your perspective.
So we've been working on this literally since the day after the president had won the election. This is something that's been in the process. There's been a lot of work, a lot of behind the scenes efforts to get this done as soon as possible. We would have liked to have gotten it done before the last water year, but there are obviously a lot of attorneys, Department of Interior. We want to make sure we protect as much as we can get done from being challenged in court later, because we know the environmentalist attorneys out of San Francisco are going to fight us on this. But it is something that actually is going to have an impact. And one of the things that also helped in that as well is when we passed the WIN Act back after the election, November 2016, and that's something that's actually playing a role in this. And so there's a few different pieces in there, components that will actually bring some water to the Central Valley, both short-term, long-term. It's actually a very positive deal. I just wish it had been done sooner.
Mr. Cox, rebuttal?
Well, I think as you pointed out, Jim, I mean, this was another political show. Did you read the memorandum? I read the memo. It was a 2-page memo. It wasn't an executive order. It wasn't any legislation. There was no money attached to it. This was simply a memo telling the president's secretaries to get to work. And I applaud that. We should be working together. But the thing is it going to deliver any additional water for our ag industry or for our communities today? And their answer is no.
All right, sir. Would you like to?
Yeah, I think I get a rebuttal on that.
Yes.
So yes, that's what a memorandum is. It's a memo that goes out to his administration. So yes, there is. It's a short document. It's right to the point. It puts hard deadlines on so that we actually accomplish something. It will deliver water. With the WIN Act that was signed into law, which is already producing water here in Kern County and is already producing water in the rest of the district as well. So yes, this plays a role with a few different parts, and it does actually deliver water.
Mr. Cox, in one of your 99% ads that's on the airwaves right now, you speak of President Trump's devastating stranglehold on our water. What do you mean by that?
Well, when you go out to communities, Arvin, Lamont, San Joaquin, Mendota, Delano, each one of these communities has got what? Poor drinking water. They don't have an access to clean, fresh drinking water. And in this memorandum, in this other legislation, is there anything to affect or to help these communities? There's not. Everyone deserves clean, fresh drinking water. I mean, I think that is a right. It's been identified as a right here in California. And we need to focus not only on our ag industry, which I'm a proud part of, but having clean, fresh drinking water for all of the citizens throughout the Central Valley.
Congressman Valadao, rebuttal?
So I answer the questions when I'm asked. There is no 99%. That is a made-up number from an organization that just takes a small percentage of a number of actual votes. There's been over 1,000 votes in Congress, and that looks at a small piece of the pie. As far as the stranglehold, just yesterday there was an announcement of water being delivered, or dollars being delivered to a community in Kings County called Stratford, a little over $1 million to help them develop some new water infrastructure so that these communities could have clean water. We've been working on things like Kettleman City and other cities to make sure that they have the ability to get some water. Some of that water comes from the Delta, so again, right back to what was signed last week, helps deliver water for these communities. And then as far as the treatment, through USDA and through other grants, we've actually been able to deliver and help a lot of our communities provide. And it's not been one administration versus the other. And I know my opponent wants to just attack one side or the other, but we've worked with both sides on this, and we've been able to deliver for a lot of communities.
Mr. Cox, do you have anything to add? And before I go to my next follow-up, I have a follow-up there too.
Yeah, certainly. When you want to talk about the 99% thing, that's something that KGET reported itself. On August 31st, he made the same claim that he doesn't vote with Donald Trump 99% of the time. KGET came back and said, yes, we checked, and in fact, he does.
I would like to get to that a little bit later in the debate.
Fair enough.
Okay?
Fair enough.
I will address that directly, okay?
Sure.
Right now, we're talking about water. What about the bill signed today by the president? $6 billion to improve the nation's water infrastructure. Is that a stranglehold that you're speaking of? Is that the stranglehold?
Well, that's a good first step towards water infrastructure. And I'm always going to provide and work on a bipartisan matter to bring more water for our ag industry and for our communities. But you know, these things, and certainly this memo, doesn't address doesn't address the big issue that we should be facing and that we need to be facing in the future, which is SGMA. That's going to be a big issue, and that's going to take leadership on so many levels, and you're going to need to have a guy who's got a record of getting things done.
You're talking about the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act.
That's exactly right.
So just to respond to that, SGMA is a California issue that was passed by California legislature. Bringing more water to the Central Valley will help solve or help the situation for our valley with SGMA, because the only way to prevent us from drying up farmland and drying up communities is to bring in more surface water. So that's why that executive order was so important and so timely, because as SGMA comes out, a state law that I had no say in, and we were very vocal in opposition to it, but this actually helps us with the SGMA situation so that we don't put as many acres out of production and so many communities out of water.
Mr. Cox, let me ask you about this. In one of your ads, you talk about, you're an engineer. I've built dams. I've built water storage projects. But here we talked about Sacramento water policy. A lot of times it's people in your party, the Democrats, who stand in the way, perhaps lean a little bit more towards the environmental issues. And so when we get an issue, something like Temperance Flat, that gets held back because largely Democrats. What do you think about your involvement in that party? What sort of Democrat are you when it comes to this?
Well, I tell you, I'm a Democrat that gets things done. As you rightly say, I've built dams and storage systems and conveyance systems. And talking about things like surface storage, yeah, we should have that. But should we do things that we can do should we do projects that we can do right now? Should we be doing underground water banking, conservation, conveyance, things that are going to make a difference right today? Look at 2017 and the excess water that we had then. What did we do with it? We watched it as it got flushed down to the ocean. Why? Because we didn't have the infrastructure or the agreements in place to be able to capture that water. When I'm in Congress, we're going to have those things in place before those happen.
Congressman, let me follow up with you on this. Is there anything you could have done differently, done more, in order to ensure that something like Temperance Flat gets more funding so that that thing gets built?
So, yes, the WIN Act helps with the dollars. Funds were created there. But right back to this debate on water, the science that's going to be used with this memorandum, with the biological opinions that are going to help deliver water here, was actually science developed under the Obama administration that they ignored. And as my opponent stood on stage with the former president at that time, that question should have been asked then. Why didn't that administration help us more? When they came out to the Central Valley, they lectured us. He lectured us on climate change and other issues, but did nothing to actually push out the science that his own agencies developed that would have actually helped us deliver 1,000,002 acre-feet. And so we finally have someone who went in and signed a document and is actually pushing that forward so we can get some water out of it. It would have been nice to have had it done sooner, but we had to wait for the administration to change. We had to wait for, obviously, new heads of all these different agencies, and now we have that in place, and it's now coming to fruition.
I want to turn to immigration right now. We've got a lot of ground to cover. There is a migrant caravan right now in Mexico. It's in the news. It stretches as far as you can see. Thousands of men, women, and children. These are people who are coming to America seeking asylum, seeking a better life for themselves. But as we have seen recently, when you get that many people coming to the border, it is difficult, both politically and logistically. So what do we do with these people when they get here? Mr. Cox, I'll start with you on this.
2 words, Evan. Failed leadership. The question is, why do we have this caravan in the first place? Why are they heading north through 3 or 4 different countries? Why wasn't something done in Guatemala or Honduras? This Congress and this president have abdicated their position of global and regional leadership. There's a whole organization of American states that take care of all of Latin America. This should have been worked on so that this caravan never happened in the first place. And now that it is happening, what do? All they can do is tweet about it, have it on the news, and say, oh, we're not prepared. Why aren't we prepared? Because we don't have comprehensive immigration reform in place. So now when they show up at the border, this administration and this Congress are saying, what do? I can tell you, this is an example of failed leadership because this Congress has not been able to get comprehensive immigration reform passed.
Still, the question remains, they're coming. And it may be weeks and weeks before they get to the border, if they get to the border. But if that happens, if you were to win, you might be in a position of leadership in which decisions are going to have to be made. So what happens to them?
What happens to them is that if I'm in office, this wouldn't happen in the first place. We'd be working with NGOs, non-governmental organizations. We'd be working with those states themselves, with Mexico, Honduras, to keep them in the country, to make sure that these refugees are safe, personally safe, and then they have economic security. This is just a crisis made because of failed leadership.
That's true, but you don't have a time machine if you get elected. You have to actually handle the people at the border right then.
And we have the processes to handle the people at the border right then. They're applying for asylum, right? They can apply for asylum, but here's the thing is, do we have the processes in place to be able to handle people efficiently and quickly to say that, yes, you do qualify, or no, you don't, and you need to be sent home? We don't. And those are things and investments that we need to be able to make to take care of these problems when they do happen.
Well, Congressman, two things then. One, the failed leadership that we just heard about that maybe led to these problems. And then two, the question of what are we going to do with these thousands of people on our southern border?
So one of the ideas that he brought up is an idea that's actually going on right now. Taxpayers are already sending dollars down there today. And so we obviously want to make sure that we spend our Americans, taxpayers, as efficiently as possible. But yes, in the last few years, we've been working with NGOs, we've been working with different communities to root out corruption and do different things in that northern triangle there to make sure that we can make their area as safe as possible for people to stay there. But a lot of these folks are not leaving that area for the safety, but more for the economic opportunity. And so these groups are growing in numbers because they want to literally overrun our systems on the border. What do we have to do to change that? We've got to come up with some dollars and make sure that we put people on the border to help process these folks. Because when the asylum laws are in place for a reason. It's there to help the most vulnerable people that desperately need it. If they're facing persecution in their home country, where their lives are in danger, their families' lives are in danger, and when they come up with groups like this, they're just trying to overrun the system because they know that we only have so much detention facilities. They know they've got a vocal group of people, especially on the Democrat side, who are really putting a lot of pressure on the president just to let them in. And we have to have a process to make sure it's fair to everyone. Fair to those who desperately need it, the families who are actually threatened, fair to those who are waiting in line today to come in through the legal process, and also safe for those who work and live on the border, because this is going to turn into a real issue, a humanitarian crisis, if it gets out of hand.
Congressman, you've been pushing for comprehensive immigration reform ever since you've been in office.
Yeah.
It's something that is important to this district. It's something that is important to you personally. And yet we have not seen a bill on this signed by the president. We have not seen the action that I know that you would like to see. There are people in this district that would probably classify that as a failure on your part. Is that fair criticism?
No, because we worked with the president back when it was President Obama. I was one of the I was the third guy to sign on, a Republican to sign on to an actual bill that had passed the Senate. We got pretty close then. We weren't able to get enough support at that point. So then now with this administration, I was also one of the few members that signed the discharge petition, went against my own leadership, and was able to bring a vote to the floor with different pieces of legislation. The Queen of the Hill was a process to bring up 4 different pieces of legislation. We could not get enough support from our Democrat colleagues to actually get a piece of legislation passed. But as far as on our part, I think we actually proved that we can move things. We just needed to get more support and a little bit of the partisanship go away, because the extremes of both sides just make it so difficult for us to move things forward.
Mr. Cox, he brought up the Queen of the Hill. These 4 bills that he tried to force, he went against the president on that. He went against Kevin McCarthy's wishes, the majority leader. Is it fair to criticize the congressman as being lockstep with the president and other leaders in the party when it comes to this particular issue?
Absolutely. What we all know is that Mr. Valadao ended up voting against his own legislation. And the reason why? Because it had Democratic support, because a Democratic bill would have passed. What happened to him is that they voted against it because to allow a hard line bill to come up, one that would have used our dreamers as bargaining chips for a border wall. Jim, you've asked the same question for 3 debates in a row now. What are you, Mr. Valadao, going to do about immigration? And you get the same response. It's not my fault. I'm working on it. We'll maybe get something done. 6 years of getting nothing done is not a track record of success. I'm a guy that gets things done. You send me to Congress, we're going to get comprehensive immigration reform passed.
I have to respond to that.
Well, I want to give 30 seconds to each of you before we move on here. So go ahead.
That was absolutely not true at all whatsoever. What he just said is that I voted against my own legislation. False. Totally made up. I have worked and worked to bring legislation to the House floor. I've negotiated. I've made my own party mad at me, and I've made the other side mad at me. But it was because I fought as hard as I possibly could to bring that to the floor. And to say that I voted against a piece of legislation that I created is just ludicrous.
And Mr. Cox, 30 seconds.
Well, you voted against the procedure to bring it to the floor. Is that the reason why? Why wasn't there the Democratic bill? Because it was meant to, it wouldn't meet with the conservative element of your party.
No.
The fact is, your party has control of every branch of government. Do you not? The House, the Senate, the White House, and you can't pass a legislation bill. You can't pass an immigration bill, one that affects anything. Your record on that, right, is 0 for 4.
Total lack of understanding of the actual process. There was no actual vote. We were 2 signatures short of getting it to the floor. There was no actual vote. Total lack of understanding of what actually happens in Washington, how it gets done.
All right, Mr. Cox, many lawmakers in your party favor open borders and no border wall at all. Where do you stand on this?
Well, I haven't heard that myself.
Oh,
I mean, we need secure borders. Now, we all know what we need with regard to immigration. We need to make sure that everyone here, anyone here, is here legally. We need secure borders. We need to make sure that our communities are safe.
Do you favor a border wall, sir?
We don't need, I do favor a border wall, but nothing out of concrete and brick and mortar. I mean, I build a lot of things like that. I mean, there's technology available that could be doing it cheaper and much more efficient. And the fact is, if we have comprehensive immigration, do we really need a border wall when people are here legally and we know if they're here legally and they have the opportunity to go back and forth? The issue is to make sure that whoever is here legally, in a policy that meets our workforce needs, doesn't tear apart our families, and certainly not one that's going to end up with kids being in cages.
Mr. Valadao, for the record, do you favor a border wall?
I support securing our border, and again, a total lack of understanding of what's going on. A wall is a part of that. I was going to get to that. Okay. So when you look at the bill, the proposal out there to actually secure the border, there are parts that require an actual structure because of what is going on around there. There's a community on one side and buildings on the other. It's literally like crossing the street. So infrastructure there makes total sense. There are areas where it makes no sense to build a wall, and so that's where some of the technology comes in. But to say that just because we pass immigration, there's no need to secure the border is someone, again, who doesn't understand the threats facing our nation. I was down at the border just a few weeks ago, and I rappelled down into a tunnel 90 feet underground that was 700 yards long just to move drugs. Yes, a wall wouldn't have stopped that, but securing the border with the technology, with the infrastructure in place that we want to fund is going to help that. I was also out on a vessel with the Coast Guard. They were bringing in $750 million worth of cocaine trying to get into Mexico. That's all product that was headed this way. Immigration reform is not going to solve those types of threats. The trafficking of minors, the cartels, all those different types of situations. So yes, securing the border is important, and it is a component. And where it makes sense, a wall makes sense. Where it doesn't, it doesn't. But that's why there's a plan in place, and that's what we're trying to get passed and sign into law. But we get no support from across the aisle.
Mr. Cox, anything to add to that?
Well, I think what we're talking about is, yeah, certainly we need some physical structures in places, but this is what we're talking about. You're talking about spending $25 billion to create a 2,000-mile wall. I mean, that is a 12th century solution to a 21st century problem.
You're referring to the bill that Congressman McCarthy is sponsoring.
That's right.
So that's actually not true. That's not $25 billion.
23.
23.
What it's $20 billion, $25 billion. It doesn't make a difference. That will not build the wall the total length. The math doesn't make sense. But you also have to remember, politics have gotten really difficult in Washington because of some of the rhetoric. And part of the issue is if you look at the $25 billion that President Trump is asking for and compare that to the Gang of 8 bill that passed out of the Senate back in 2013 with every single Democrat senator voting for it, there's actually $40 billion in that for border security. And now $20 billion is too much. I mean, I think we've got to kick down the rhetoric, have an actual conversation, and let facts be facts. And that's what's important. Have someone in the conversation who actually understands what's going on and understands what these effects will have in our communities and our border.
Right, let me ask you a question about amnesty or a path to citizenship. Do you think that amnesty or a path to citizenship should be afforded all undocumented immigrants currently in this country? Where do you stand on that issue, Mr. Cox?
No, we should take a step-by-step approach. One, we should first allow the dreamers a direct path to citizenship. And they've been here, I can tell you what, they've been through 14 background checks. We know a number of things, we know they're not colluding with Russians because they've had checks on their education, on their credit, everything. And so what we need to do is take step-by-step approaches. People that are here shouldn't be here and should be sent home. Certainly people that are causing any harm or crime in our communities. But there are people here that are working and working hard. I mean, I was just in Corcoran talking to a young family, 4 kids, and their mom, who had been working here for 20 years, paying taxes, right, playing by the rules. She was stopped in a traffic stop. She was picked up and deported. It's tough for me to see how that represents the best values of compassion and empathy and generosity and respect for hard work here in America.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Congressman Valadao, rebuttal?
No, this is an area
Same
where...
question to you, sir.
Well, obviously, I want to make sure that we get a process done. So the folks that are here undocumented today, coming out of the shadows, allowing us to figure out who they are, pay back taxes, pay penalties, whatever we need to do, but allow them a process so they can come out of shadows and potentially path to earn legal status or even citizenship, depending on the person and their background and what we have to deal with. As far as the rest of the immigration process, we have to do other things too, like solving our visas and our guest worker programs so that the pressure isn't there for folks to sneak across the border. And then the next line is also securing the border. So it's a three-part step, but all three of those are very, very important.
Mr. Cox, we're talking, you mentioned DACA, protecting their ability to be here without fear of deportation. One of the deals that we've heard thrown out there quite a bit is get the money for border wall, get the 25 billion in exchange for the DACA protection. If that deal was put in front of you in office, is that a deal that you would say, okay, I'll sign off on that?
The deal that I would put, no, I wouldn't use our DACA recipients as bargaining chips. These are young men and women that have been here. They've been paying taxes. They've been playing by the rules. And to throw them out, to use them as bargaining chips, I think is unconscionable. They should have a direct path. There should be a clean DREAM Act. And then there's a number of things. Should we fund some money for a border wall? Yeah, we should, but as part of a comprehensive immigration bill. That's what I'd be doing. And Mr. Valadao wants to say, oh, well, we should be doing this and we should be doing that. The fact is, once again, they have control of every branch of government. Don't tell me what we should be doing. Get on and do it. You've got the control. You've got the power. You've got the president with a pen. Go ahead and do it.
Congressman?
So the rebuttal is, again, talking out of both sides of his mouth. When you say it would be part of a comprehensive deal, that would basically say that, yes, I will do this if we do that. You're combining all three different issues. I am supportive of a comprehensive bill. I've always been supportive of comprehensive of a piece of immigration reform. But saying that I'm going to do this just because we can support this, I'll fund a border wall if I can get this for it, you're literally talking out both sides of your mouth, because you've just said, oh, I'm not going to fund a border wall for immigration reform. You can't say both. You have to do both. Supporting our bill, supporting immigration reform includes doing all of the above. You allow those who are in the shadows to come out and figure out who they are, give them the opportunity to come clean and resolve their status, fix our legislation out there, or fix our rules so we have a process for the future flow, and then securing our border.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to take a quick break here. You're watching a live debate featuring the candidates for California's 21st Congressional District here on TV 17 and KC24 in Fresno. We're live and we're back after the break.
And welcome back. You are watching a debate here for the 21st Congressional District. We have TJ Cox and the incumbent Congressman David Valadao joining us here today. Jim Scott, Evan Onstott, thank you for being with us. Gentlemen, let's move on to health care right now. Another big one for the 21st, that's for sure. Congressman, I want to start with you on this. The Fresno Bee editorial board recommended your opponent for this job. And when they did so, they cited your vote for the American Health Care Act, which would have cut Medi-Cal and reduced future enrollments in the program. People in the 21st rely heavily on Medi-Cal. We've talked about this. You would like to see that reduced greatly. You don't like Medi-Cal for the district as much. Why is that?
Well, it's not specifically anything against Medi-Cal. What we have to worry about is the future of the Valley. And Medi-Cal reimbursement rates are low. Communities relying on Medi-Cal do not attract new doctors. And when you look at the Central Valley, and one of the issues that we struggle with the most is attracting doctors, attracting specialists, attracting folks to our communities, for our families to see. I've got a young family. I want my kids to see the best doctors. And a lot of times you can't find them around the Central Valley because they're fleeing this area. So the reason why I voted for that piece of legislation is because I couldn't defend status quo. When we see families losing their coverage because they can no longer afford it, because rates are going out of control and just continuing to rise, people continue to go back to Medi-Cal as the backup safety net. And Medi-Cal was originally created as a safety net, but we have to have a path off of that. And so when I would meet with families throughout the Central Valley, and I'd have one lady came in my office with her kids on her back, and she literally told me, she goes, I'm afraid of my husband getting a better job because I'll lose my benefits. That's a problem. If you don't have at least some sort of leap to the next plan, and that's why that bill was so important, is it actually helped lower insurance costs, so folks had an option to leap off of the safety net program onto an actual health insurance program that actually helps them make decisions like everyone else, have choices in their doctors, have choices in where to have their kids seen. And so those are all important things, and that's why I couldn't support status quo, and I had to vote for a piece of legislation that moved us in a different direction.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Cox, you and the congressman are far apart when it comes to health care on so many issues and in so many ways.
In so many ways, because this is what I do every day. I fund community health clinics. I've seen the great positive effect that they've had on our health care for families throughout the district. And that's why his vote was cruel and just so reckless. 108,000 people in the district would have lost health care because of his vote. He says that Medicaid rates, reimbursement rates are too low, and voted to cut $840 billion out of the Medicaid system. I mean, rates aren't going to go up because of that. I know we can deliver quality, affordable health care for all, because like I said, that's what I do every day. We need to enhance community health clinics. We need to enhance job training for healthcare professionals here throughout the Valley. We need to reduce the cost of healthcare. And those are the things I'm going to do in Congress. I can tell you is that he's talking to people. I was talking to this woman the other day in Selma. 4 out of her 5 family members can be considered to have pre-existing conditions. If their legislation goes through, we're going to lose those protections. And that's happening right now. If this Congress does not flip, people are going to lose their Social Security, their Medicaid, their Medicare, and their protections for pre-existing conditions. That's something I'm not going to stand by and let happen. I'm going to stand up for the people, ensure that everyone has comprehensive health care.
This is a big one, so I want to go back and forth another 30 seconds. I saw you shaking your head, sir.
More scare tactics. The reality is there was no vote to eliminate pre-existing conditions. The piece of legislation had specific parts in there. The Upton Amendment was the one that I was a leader on to make sure that we guaranteed protections for pre-existing conditions. So, and then bringing in Medicare and Social Security and all the other typical points that people running for office like to bring up. Not true. There was never a vote on any of that. So there were no cuts. As far as the piece of legislation, yes, there are a lot of folks who are on Medi-Cal in the district. We want to give them options. We want to give them the same opportunities families like my opponents does up in Fresno, with good insurance and the ability to actually pick their doctors, pick their specialists, and get the best care they want for their families.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Cox, 30 seconds.
He should talk to Bob in Hanford, a Republican, that called up the office and said, because of the ACA, I was able to get health insurance right before I found out I had cancer. Bob would probably not be with us today if he had not had that. This is the legislation he voted against. He says pre-existing conditions are part of the ACA, but we're just trying to save that. That's not true. That's untrue. He voted against the Affordable Care Act 50-some times before it passed. And when they finally came up, they had no plan to replace it. No sensible plan.
Mr. Cox, in our conversations before...
So I have to rebut that, though.
Quickly, then.
There were no cuts to pre-existing conditions. That same person, Bob, would have had the opportunity to continue his coverage, would not have lost coverage.
Mr. Cox, in our conversations prior, you said that you are a supporter. You'd like us to move to a universal health care system. You'd like us to move in that direction. That obviously costs money. Californians already feel like they're being taxed enough. So would you support raising taxes on Californians in order to make something like that work?
Well, that's an assumption that's false, Evan, because here's what everyone knows. We already have a system that everyone gets health care. If you're sick, you're eventually going to end up in the ER. Our healthcare system depends on you get health, but as the poorer as you get it as sicker as you get. And so we pay for it right now. A system where people could buy in and have health care, it actually brings down the cost, it improves the health of our communities and our economy. That's why people in other countries, they pay half of what we do and cover everyone. And their health care, their health, and their life expectancy is higher than we have in the U.S. We should be leaders on that, not followers.
Congressman, that is true. Other countries spend a lot less money on health care in systems in which everybody's covered, and they spend less money on doing it. So how is this not a great idea?
Again, family of immigrants, and so I have a lot of family. Just today spoke to one of my aunts in the Azores. When they look for health care and they look for the best, they come to the U.S. We do have the best doctors in the world. We do have the best specialties in the world. And there's a reason why we have our system has been very successful. We outsource some of that. A lot of folks, especially when they have a lot more money in other countries, will come in. Sat down and had dinner with a gentleman from Canada not long ago. He says, we always hear about how great it is, but him as a person would prefer to come here in the U.S. and be treated, because the free service, again, when we look at how good government runs everything, look at the DMV, for example. Would you want the DMV running your healthcare decisions? And we've all learned in California that doesn't work. And so we've got to make sure that we have a system in place that protects people. And then as far as the actual cost of this, the experts have already said what it's going to cost. On the federal side, $32 trillion. The state side, they pushed the language. They actually moved it out of one of the houses until some calmer heads prevailed and said there's no way we can afford this. We'll literally have to triple or quadruple taxes to cover these costs. Yep. It makes no sense.
Well, they didn't have the budget for it. They didn't have a budget framework for single-payer health care, is what you're talking about here in California. And that leads me to my next question, gentlemen. What if California decides to go it alone and develop its own single-payer health system? Would you, as a member of Congress, vote to support legislation that would essentially allow the state to use the millions and millions of dollars in Medicare dollars it now receives from Uncle Sam, to use it any way the state wants in order to create and fund a single-payer healthcare system? Mr. Cox, you first.
Well, we'd have to take a look at that, Jim. What we know is that the Medicaid expansion, the expansion that my opponent voted against, has been super successful in California. It's brought down uninsured rates down to the low single digits. It's improved the health of our economy and our entire state. And so if it's a nice incremental step to get to Medicare or some type of universal system that's going to cost less and cover everyone, that's something I'm certainly going to look at. You know, Medicaid with a public option buy-in is something that certainly should be considered. We know we can get to quality, affordable health care for all, particularly for our middle-class families. We just need the political willpower to be able to get there.
Congressman Valadao, rebuttal?
No, it would, on the question, I'll answer the question, is it depends on what the language looks like. If the state passes something that's reasonable, I'll work with them. If it puts my constituents in danger, no, I'm not going to work with them. It just depends on the specifics of the deal and what happens. But right now, I don't see that happening. The cost was just so astronomical that they knew they couldn't afford it.
So do you think this pre-existing conditions, should it be a hands-off approach with whatever kind of a health care plan finally comes out of Congress? Should it honor pre-existing conditions? Congressman?
Yes.
And Mr. Cox?
Yes. And you need to have a comprehensive health care system to be able to do that. Okay. Because what happened before the Affordable Care Act? Insurance companies could deny a person with pre-existing conditions. But the Affordable Care Act, what did that do? That said you had to treat everyone the same, pre-existing condition or not. You can charge everyone the same, right? That was the first positive step towards basically healthcare equity. Now they want to go back to where basically, if you're sick, you're on your own. 46% of the residents of the 21st Congressional District could be considered to have pre-existing conditions. He'd like to say, oh, we're going to create a special pool. It's not a special pool when half your population can be considered to be in that pool.
So I was quick on my answer. Yes, we protect pre-existing conditions, but we also want to make sure that we all understand that insurance rates went through the roof. I still have my same insurance I had before I ever ran for office. I never took any insurance for my job in Congress. And so my insurance rates went up just like everybody else's, and it's gone crazy. We have to make sure we get those in line so that folks, again, have that opportunity to get their own insurance and be able to make their own personal decisions for their families, just like I have the opportunity to do.
All right. Gentlemen, now to the fact or fiction portion of our debate tonight. Focusing on some of the mud that our viewers have been seeing flying across their TV screens for the last several months. A couple of questions for you now about the claims you've made in your political ads during this campaign. Mr. Cox, let's take the claim we've heard so many times before, as you've tried to make this race as much about the president as Mr. Valadao. The claim that the congressman votes with President Trump 99% of the time. Fact or fiction?
That's a fact. Look, did the president want to take away health care and abolish the ACA? Yes, he did. How did my opponent vote? He voted with the president. Did my opponent want to pass a tax bill that gave $1 trillion benefit to corporate donors and the very wealthy and cause a doubling of our deficit? Did he vote with the president? Yes, he did. And now what's happening? Cuts to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. The leaders of his party, each one of them announced that right after the election, that's what we're going to go after. As this president enacted a insane immigration policy that's resulting in families being chased across highways and through fields, right? What did my opponent do? He sat by and put out a statement that said, quote, "I'm monitoring the situation. We need leadership in Congress, and it doesn't come from a guy that's following this president 99% of the time."
Congressman Valadao, rebuttal.
So it's a joke. It really is. When you look at the number of votes out there that we take, and if you're going to take a small slice of it, you can literally make up any tagline you want for any ad. And that's what my opponent chose to do. The 99% comes off of less than 100 votes out of over 1,000 votes that's happened. So it's just a game that's played by people running for office.
We did a little checking on that, and you mentioned it earlier, Mr. Cox. We checked with the impartial congressional tracking website called 538.com. 538 found that Mr. Valadao voted in line with Mr. Trump on 92 votes, dating back to January of 2017, and yet there were 1,200 votes during that same time period. So is that an accurate sampling, Mr. Cox, or is that statistical cherry picking?
It's the votes that matter. Naming a post office or some street, those aren't the substantive issues that matter to the people. It's voting about taking away your health care. It's voting about attacking your Medicare and Social Security. On the votes that matter, he is in lockstep with this president.
Mr. Valadao?
I will never, ever waste my time looking at any of the political cherry-picking groups out there that have their scorecards. It's not what represents the district. When I represent the district, I go back and I vote for what's best for the district. It doesn't matter if there's a scorecard from what organization to make a decision. I don't let some faceless, nameless person in some office make the decision for me. I look at the facts, I read the legislation, and I see what's important for the people here in the 21st Congressional District, and that's the only scorecard that matters. Looking at just 90 out of 1,200 votes, it's, like I said, a joke.
All right, Mr. Cox, another one of your ads claims part of the president's health care plan would impose an age tax that could result in older Americans paying 5 times more for their health care, and that David Valadao is with the president in lockstep with the president on this bill every step of the way. Fact or fiction?
It's a fact.
Congressman?
It's fiction. There's no such thing as an age tax. What happened with Obamacare is they actually linked the younger folks with seniors on their insurance 3-to-1. And so what it did was it actually raised the cost of young families so that they could no longer afford coverage. And what happened once you got rid of a full market of young folks and seniors in the same market, rates went up for everyone. And so what we did is we put in a split from 3-to-1 to 5-to-1, where the market should be, so that we can keep insurance rates low enough so young families can afford to buy insurance. That's the ultimate goal of this, is making things affordable so people can make their own decisions and make their own choices. And that's why this age tax attack is a sad, sad thing for someone to say, because it's not even true. There's no such thing as a tax. It was a change from Obamacare because it didn't exist before. They installed that system, it raised rates for everyone, and so people lost coverage, and so we're trying to remedy that situation.
Mr. Cox, 30 seconds to
Well,
rebut.
I think what you're trying to say is that before they could charge seniors 3 times as much, but because of your action, they could charge them 5 times as much. That's exactly what we're saying. You would like to charge seniors 5 times more for their insurance than the regular population. And the seniors I know, they can't afford that.
We also saw...
It's a moving target. As rates go up and as the younger generation's costs get out of hand and they can no longer afford, seniors went up. That was a fix that they put in Obamacare to try to help keep costs lower, but it actually raised costs. We tried to fix that.
Let me ask about another ad from Mr. Valadao against you, saying you were sued for fraud. You were sued for elder abuse. You were sued by your own lawyers. What is fact? What is fiction in that?
I'm so glad you brought that up, Evan.
Well, you knew I was going to.
Absolutely. Because it's unfortunate that these lies are at the core of Congressman Valadao's campaign. I mean, take, for example, the senior house that he's citing in so many of his ads. That is rated as one of the top memory care facilities in Fresno. And it's also rated in the top 1% for senior homes in the nation because of the quality of care and the resident satisfaction. But this is just a playbook out of Mr. Valadao and his DC consultants. But I can tell you, these are having real harm to people not even associated with this campaign. My mom has dementia, which is why I took an eager and enthusiastic role in developing this facility. But now, because of his attacks, the woman who owns and operates that facility, a woman who has dedicated her life to providing the utmost and compassionate care, I can tell you, she's receiving threats not only against her business, but her personal safety. I mean, we deserve much better than that. Mr. Valadao wants to run these smear campaigns because he doesn't have a record to run on, and he doesn't want to talk about the issues.
Mr. Cox.
These are, he should be ashamed of himself for running these ads. And this is something that when I get to Congress, I'm not going to have to depend on these types of ads to get reelected.
Thank you, sir. I know that you're not the one, Congressman, actually doing all this research and digging up the stuff. You all have people that look up these things. Still, the words that are being used in your ads, labeling him as unethical, corrupt, wrong, those are pretty harsh words right there. Do you stand by them?
Yes. When you look at, and this is not going off of some bogus website. This is actual California Department of Health and Human Services citations that we found all this information. This is not a secret. It's public. It's out there, and it's all been backed up with actual evidence. We have documents from every single one of those, and they're all true. They're actually true.
Well, let's move on right now to tax cuts, because that's something that I know both of you disagree about. Congressman, you were very quick and you continued to tout the tax cuts. Big victory for the president, for the party. It was a big piece of legislation. Mr. Cox, you see it completely different. You see it as benefiting the wrong people. Go ahead and give your perspective before we bring in the congressman on what is better for the Valley here.
Sure. What's better for the Valley is putting more money in the pockets of the hardworking men and women. But look what this tax bill did, right? Doubled the deficit, and look how fair it was. The corporations got a 40% tax cut. Individuals got a 6% tax cut. The corporate rates, those were made permanent. The individual rates were made temporary. So you can see where his allegiance lies, certainly not with the people. And now look what's happening. Because of the deficit, because of this tax giveaway, what happened last week? Mitch McConnell, Paul Ryan, they said, hey, because of this deficit, now we have to go after and cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That's exactly what they wanted to do. We all knew that they wanted to do it. Give a tax break to the very wealthy, cause a deficit, and use that to attack Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid.
You're doing my job for me, because that was going to be the next question that I was going to transition to. But so please answer the question, Congressman, about Social Security, Medicare. Would you sign a bill that would cut either one of those? And also your defense of the tax bill.
So the attacks are, again, just liberal talking points from his bosses in D.C. that told him to run in this district.
It's a pretty common thing that we're hearing from Democrats right now. They're worried that if Republicans stay in control, that this is going to happen.
What those taxes did is 83% of the people that live in the 21st Congressional District literally got double their tax break. $1,700 per family is what the average one, and that's from the Congressional Research Service. That's not a partisan group. That's not some political hack out there. That's actual information based on the facts in the district. As far as the business side of the tax structure, yeah, we had to do something to make sure that our businesses are competitive. We see time and time again over decades businesses leaving the U.S. for different reasons, setting up tax shelters off our coast, investing in other countries, not bringing those profits back into the U.S. Bringing those dollars back into our communities made us more competitive on a world stage. That is very important when you get into the trade argument. As far as our businesses, I've been through quite a few different plants. Sales are up. Businesses are doing better. They're giving their employees raises. $1,700 more in tax breaks for those. Double the child tax credit. Those are all things that have a real impact for real people in the Central Valley who actually live here. And then the other thing is, there were businesses that were a little concerned with it. They didn't feel that they got enough. But then they figured out really fast what the actual goal of those taxes were. It was for us to encourage investment in their businesses. That creates jobs. If it's buying equipment from a sales company or building another shop on their facility, those are the types of investments we wanted, and that's why we passed that tax bill.
Mr. Cox, let me give you 30 seconds to respond to that.
Well, Mr. Valadao's, and the argument was that these tax breaks were somehow going to flow down and trickle down to the pockets of the hardworking people here in the district. I'd say go out and talk to the hardworking families and the people that are working out at Sunmaid. They had a 50-cent an hour raise. They paid taxes on it, and then they were required to put back 45 cents as a contribution towards their medical and health benefits. So they got a net 10-cent an hour decrease. That's why they went out on strike. Mr. Valadao would know that if we would come out and speak to them. But he wasn't anywhere near that Soundmaid strike because he was sitting with his corporate donors back in D.C.
All right, Mr. Cox, your opponent has tried to label you as an outsider and an opportunist in this race. You claimed a home in Maryland as your primary homestead, made a big deal out of that, something your campaign has described as an honest mistake. You were running in the 10th Congressional District race against Jeff Denham in a crowded field until Emilio Huerta of Bakersfield bailed out of this race, and so that left no one running against Mr. Valadao, so you jumped into the 21st Congressional District race. Should the voters care about any of that?
You know what the voters care about? They care about my track record of accomplishment here in the 21st Congressional District. They care about the community health clinics I've built in Mendota and Parlier and Selma and Sanger. They care about the community health clinics I'm building now in Delano and Bakersfield and Shafter. They care about the job training facilities I've created out in Kalinga and Lemoore and Fresno. They care about my record of accomplishment. When you knock on somebody's door and ask for their vote, the number one thing they ask for you is, what have you done for me? What can you do for me? And when I point out my record of accomplishment, what I've actually gotten done down here, they said, you're a guy that we know can deliver for us.
Okay.
Mr.
We're running out of time. I want to give Mr. Valadao 45 seconds to rebut, and then we're going to closing statements.
I can't imagine what it would be like to wake up in the morning and say, I don't know where I'm going to run. I live in Congressional District number 16, Jim Coss's district. I think I'm going to run in Modesto. I'm going to move up there. And then the party bosses up in Washington call you up and say, you know what, you should consider running for California 21st. A little bit closer to where you live. You don't have to worry about that home up at Modesto you're claiming to live in, and you can just go down there and run in that district. I can't imagine what that would be like. I wake up in the morning at home, and I go out and I see my neighbors, the people I represent, the people I've known since I was a kid, and my kids go to school with. I mean, it's home for me. It's the area that I love. There's nothing more that I want to do than fight for this district and continue to represent them in Washington.
Gentlemen, we appreciate your very thoughtful answers here tonight. We're just about out of time. I want to give you a chance for closing statements, and by virtue of a coin toss, Mr. Valadao, you will go first. 60 seconds, please, sir.
Well, I want to say thank you to both of you and to both stations, KC and KGT, for hosting this event. I think it's very helpful for us to be able to have this opportunity to go out and speak to our constituents, and so I appreciate that. I want to continue my fight in Washington. We've made some really big accomplishments through with water. We've made some strong accomplishments on growing the economy. We're seeing the improvements of that now, and I want to continue that for the future. So I ask for everyone's vote at home. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Cox, you have the final word.
In 12 days from now, we're going to have an election that's so much more than Democrat versus a Republican. It's going to be about who we are as a country and where we're going to be in the future. Are we going to stand by and watch our health care be taken away, our Social Security and Medicare be shredded? Are we going to stand by and watch our friends and families and neighbors continue to be insulted and disrespected? Or will we bring back the decency, the integrity, and the common sense of the people back to our Congress? I've got a proven track record of delivering real results for the families of this district. It's what I've done as a private citizen, and it's what I know I can continue to do as your next congressman. My promise to you is simple. I will never forget that I work for you. It would be an honor to have your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, gentlemen. And that will conclude our candidates debate for California's 21st Congressional District. We wish both candidates the best of luck in their respective campaigns as we head down the stretch to Election Day, November 6th.
Yeah, and of course we encourage those of you watching right now, if you're watching, you're probably going to vote. I'm assuming. Again, the polls open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you vote by mail, your ballot must be postmarked on or before November 6th. They got to receive it in the county elections office by November 9th. That's the deadline there.
And if you'd like to see this debate again, we will be posting it on our website at kget.com and on centralvalley.com. Also a rebroadcast coming up this Saturday evening at 6 p.m.
Yeah, and at KC this Sunday at 8 a.m. So see that. And by the way, go online right now because we have live reaction of this debate on our websites and on our Facebook page.
All right, the show after
the show after the show. It's well named.
All right. For Evan Onstott, I'm Jim Scott. Thanks for being with us tonight, and good night.
More live debates tomorrow. West Virginia